The contract sat on the table like a landmine. $2.4 billion. OmniCorp's signature hovered 3 inches above the paper, a Mont Blanc pen catching the sterile LED light of the glass boardroom. Outside, Chicago's skyline blurred through the rain-streaked windows. Inside, the air was cold enough to fog breath. I watched Julian's hand hover. He wasn't signing yet. He was waiting for my badge to be deactivated. Marcus stood at the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks with the calm precision of a man who believed he was orchestrating history. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. Behind him, 2 corporate security officers waited near the frosted glass doors, their posture rigid, their earpieces blinking green. Elias, Marcus finally said, his voice smooth, practiced, entirely empty of warmth. We're restructuring the technology division effective immediately. Julian will assume full oversight of the Aegis architecture. You'll be transitioned to a consulting advisory role. Standard severance applies. He said it like he was offering me a coffee. I didn't move. I watched Julian slide the pen onto the table. He didn't look at the contract. He looked at me. There was no malice in his eyes. There was something worse. Dismissal. The quiet, polished arrogance of a man who had never had to prove himself, who believed competence was a line item on a resume, not a language spoken in sleepless nights and silent server rooms. You built a beautiful prototype, Elias, Julian said, leaning back in the Eames chair that had cost more than my first car. But it's time for enterprise-grade leadership. We're moving toward modular AI integration. The board wants visibility. They want dashboards. They want a face. I kept my hands flat on the table. The wood was cold. My pulse was steady. I had been in rooms like this before. Not this exact room, not with this exact contract, but I knew the geometry of betrayal. It always followed the same architecture. Ego first. Panic later. The OmniCorp signing window closes at midnight, I said quietly. The Aegis routing protocol handles 300,000 concurrent logistic streams. If you switch architecture mid-deployment, the latency thresholds will breach. You'll trigger cascading API failures across their entire supply chain network. Julian smiled. It was a practice smile. The kind you buy at a leadership seminar. We've already run simulations. The new framework is optimized. We're not afraid to iterate. You're running simulations, I said. You're running PowerPoint slides. Marcus finally looked at me. His eyes were flat. Security will escort you out. Hand over your credentials. Now. I reached into my jacket pocket. Julian's posture tightened. The security officer stepped forward. I pulled out a matte black USB drive. I placed it on the table next to the contract. That's the root authentication key, I said. The decryption layer for the core routing engine. It's tied to my biometric hash. Without it, the system enters read-only mode. It won't process new routing commands. It will hold existing shipments in place. Julian's smile didn't fade. It just froze. That's fine. We'll rebuild the auth layer. We have engineers for that. You don't, I said. I am the engineer. And you just made the most expensive mistake of your career. Marcus nodded to the security officer. The man stepped forward. I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I smoothed the front of my shirt, picked up my coat, and walked toward the door. The hallway carpet swallowed my footsteps. The elevator chimed. The doors slid open. I stepped inside. I watched the boardroom shrink through the closing gap. Marcus was already turning to Julian, speaking in low, urgent tones. Julian was tapping his phone. The contract sat untouched. The elevator descended. 42 floors to the lobby. I watched the numbers drop. My breathing remained even. My hands didn't shake. I had been preparing for this exact moment for 11 months. What he didn't realize was that the USB drive wasn't the root key. It was a diagnostic mirror, a decoy. The real authentication layer wasn't stored on company servers. It never was. It lived in a distributed network I had architected in silence, anchored by a holding company that owned something Julian would never find in a boardroom briefing. A patent. Not a provisional filing. Not a corporate assignment. A fully granted, independently held intellectual property asset. U.S. Patent 11,842,903. Method and system for autonomous predictive logistics optimization using decentralized neural routing. The core algorithm that powered every shipment, every routing decision, every revenue stream for the past 6 years. And I had never transferred it to the company. The lobby doors opened. Cold rain hit my shoulders. I walked into the Chicago wind. I didn't look back. My phone vibrated in my pocket. One message. From Sarah Chen, head of back-end engineering. They're pushing Julian's build to staging, I told you. I typed back a single word. Wait, that was the beginning, not an ending. A calibration. I had built Aegis in a rented garage in Evanston 7 years before the OmniCorp deal. Back then, it wasn't a product. It was a proof of concept. A neural routing engine designed to solve a problem that kept me awake at 3 in the morning. Logistics networks were bleeding efficiency. Human dispatchers made errors. Legacy systems couldn't scale. Predictive models failed under real-world volatility. Weather, port closures, labor strikes, fuel surcharges. The entire industry was running on static equations trying to navigate a dynamic world. I wrote the first version in Python. Then I migrated the heavy lifting to C++. Then I built the distributed inference layer. I didn't sleep for 9 months. I survived on black coffee, microwave meals, and the quiet obsession that only engineers understand. You don't build something like this for money. You build it because the math refuses to leave you alone. The algorithm didn't guess. It learned. It didn't optimize for speed, it optimized for resilience. It mapped millions of routing variables in real time, weighted them against historical disruption patterns, and generated adaptive pathways that self-corrected when conditions shifted. It wasn't magic, it was architecture. Careful, meticulous, uncompromising architecture. When Marcus Thorne found me, he was running a mid-tier logistics software company bleeding clients to competitors. He saw the demo. He didn't understand the math, but he understood the money. He offered me equity. He offered me a title. He offered me a team. I took the deal because I needed infrastructure. Servers, legal, distribution. I didn't take it because I believed in his vision. I took it because it was the fastest path to deployment. I filed the patent before I signed the employment agreement. I structured it through a separate LLC. I drafted the licensing terms in a way that granted the company exclusive commercial rights contingent on my continued role as lead architect. It wasn't a trap, it was insurance. I had watched too many founders get stripped of their own work. I knew how corporate restructuring worked. I knew how board politics erased engineering contributions, so I built a firewall. Not in code, in law the company grew, fast. Aegis transformed from a back-end tool into a market-defining platform. Revenue tripled in 2 years. Enterprise contracts followed. Fortune 500 clients signed multi-year deals. The engineering team expanded from 6 to 80. I stayed in the background. I reviewed code. I audited infrastructure. I mentored junior developers. I never gave keynote speeches. I never stood on stages. I preferred server rooms to boardrooms. I liked the hum of cooling fans. I liked the glow of terminal windows. I liked building things that worked when nobody was watching. Marcus noticed the revenue. He didn't notice the architecture. He saw a product he could brand. He saw a platform he could scale. He saw an IPO opportunity, and he saw me as a liability. Too quiet. Too technical, too resistant to his vision of flashy analytics dashboards and executive-facing AI summaries. He wanted visibility, I wanted stability, he wanted growth, I wanted control. We were never going to coexist. That's when he brought Julian in. Julian Thorne didn't have a technical degree. He had a business administration diploma from a private university and a resume padded with consulting gigs at boutique firms that specialized in corporate rebranding. He was polished, he was articulate. He was completely unqualified to oversee a system that processed 12 petabytes of routing data daily. But he was family, and family in corporate America often outvotes competence. Julian arrived with a mandate: modernize, simplify, monetize. He didn't understand that Aegis wasn't a dashboard. It wasn't a user interface. It was a mathematical organism. It required careful handling. It required respect for its constraints. Julian didn't care about constraints. He cared about optics. He wanted to strip out the legacy routing layers. He wanted to replace the distributed inference engine with a cloud-hosted AI wrapper. He wanted to push it live before the OmniCorp signing to prove his leadership. I warned him. I presented the data. I showed him the latency simulations. I explained the cryptographic handshake that tied the core routing engine to the deployment pipeline. I told him that stripping the legacy layer would break the authentication chain. I told him the system would enter protective throttling. I told him that enterprise clients don't tolerate degraded routing. They cancel contracts. He smiled. He called it legacy thinking. He called it engineering resistance to progress. He called it fear. I stopped warning him. I started documenting every conversation, every email, every architectural review. I backed them to encrypted drives. I shared summaries with the lead engineers who still respected the math. Elias Chen, David Park, Linnea Torres. They knew what Julian was doing. They knew the system would break. They couldn't stop it. They weren't in the boardroom. They were in the trenches, and they watched me get sidelined. The board meeting was never about performance. It was about control. Marcus had already negotiated the severance package. The HR director had the paperwork ready. The legal team had drafted the non-disparagement clause. They wanted me out before the OmniCorp deal closed. They wanted Julian's name on the press release. They wanted the stock price to climb on the narrative of leadership transition. I didn't fight it. I let it happen. Because fighting in a boardroom is useless when you control the foundation. When the elevator doors closed, I stepped into the rain. I walked to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. I didn't start the engine. I opened my laptop. I connected to a secure terminal. I pulled up the patent registry. I verified the licensing agreement. I checked the cryptographic audit logs. Everything was in place. The system was still mine. They just didn't know it yet. My phone rang. It was Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. Elias, his voice was tight now. The urgency was bleeding through. We need to discuss the transition timeline. Julian's team is requesting access to the routing schema. Please coordinate with IT to expedite credential handover. I didn't call back. I typed a command into the terminal. I triggered a silent diagnostic ping to the Aegis core. The system responded instantly. Latency, 14 milliseconds. Node integrity, 100%. Routing cache, optimal. The algorithm was running smoothly. It always did. It would keep running until Julian tried to rewrite it. That's when everything changed. Julian didn't wait. He pushed his build to staging at 3:17 p.m. I watched the deployment logs through a back channel Sarah had quietly maintained. She didn't hack anything. She just left a monitoring endpoint open. She knew what was coming. She wanted to see it fail on her terms, not theirs. The staging environment accepted the new build. The cloud wrapper initialized. The legacy routing layer was suspended. The authentication handshake attempted to reconnect. It failed. The system didn't crash. It didn't throw errors. It did something worse. It adapted. The Aegis core detected an unauthorized architecture shift. It recognized the missing cryptographic signature. It triggered a protective protocol I had written 3 years earlier, Protocol Theta. It didn't shut down, it throttled. It reduced routing throughput by 40%. It locked new deployment commands. It maintained existing shipments in stable queues. It prioritized data integrity over speed. Julian saw the throughput drop. He assumed it was a caching issue. He ordered a restart. The system rebooted. It reinitialized. It detected the same architecture mismatch. It throttled again. This time 30%. He ordered a rollback. The staging environment didn't have a clean rollback path. The new build had overwritten critical configuration files. The system entered degraded mode. Alerts started firing. Client monitoring dashboards turned yellow. Then red. By 6 p.m., the engineering Slack channels were burning. Sarah posted a single message. They're touching the core routing layer without auth validation. Theta protocol is active. I didn't respond. I watched the logs. I watched the panic spread through the executive team. I watched Marcus schedule an emergency board call. I watched Julian send a company-wide email announcing a temporary network optimization phase. He called it a planned maintenance window. He lied. I closed my laptop. I drove home. I made coffee. I sat at my desk. I pulled up the patent enforcement documents. I reviewed the licensing agreement. I checked the compliance clauses. Everything was airtight. The company had never acquired the patent. They had licensed it. The license was contingent on my continued architectural oversight. The moment they terminated my employment without mutual agreement, the license entered conditional suspension. I had 72 hours to formally notify them. I didn't plan to wait that long. I drafted the compliance notice. I attached the patent registration. I attached the licensing agreement. I attached the cryptographic audit logs proving the system's dependency on my proprietary architecture. I sent it to the general counsel. I copied the board. I copied Marcus. I copied Julian. I hit send at 8:42 p.m. The email subject line was simple. Patent enforcement notice, licensing suspension pending. Within 11 minutes, my phone started ringing. I didn't answer. I watched the emails pile up. The legal department was scrambling. The board was requesting immediate clarification. Marcus was demanding I return to the office. Julian was posting internal messages accusing me of corporate sabotage. I finally picked up. It was the general counsel. Her voice was tight, controlled, but underneath it, I heard the crack of realization. Elias, she said, this is highly irregular. The company operates under a commercial license for the Aegis routing architecture. You were the lead architect. You signed the employment agreement. The patent assignment was implied. It wasn't implied, I said. It was explicitly excluded. Section 14, paragraph 3, all pre-existing intellectual property developed prior to employment remains with the originating entity. The patent was filed before my start date. The LLC holds it. The license is conditional. You terminated my role. The license suspends. You're operating outside authorized terms. She was silent for 6 seconds. I heard papers shuffling. I heard her typing. I heard the quiet panic of a lawyer realizing the foundation had shifted. We'll need to review the documentation, she said carefully. This doesn't change your termination. The board has already voted. I know, I said, but it changes your deployment. You can't run the system without the license. You can't push updates without cryptographic validation. You can't serve enterprise clients without compliant architecture. You have 72 hours before formal injunction proceedings begin, or you can negotiate reinstatement terms. You're blackmailing us, she said. I'm enforcing a contract, I said. There's a difference. Blackmail is illegal. Contract enforcement is legal. I didn't break anything. I'm protecting what I built. She ended the call. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt focused. This wasn't revenge. This was calibration. The system required balance. The corporate structure had broken it. I was restoring it. The next morning, the company's internal messaging platform was chaos. Engineers were reporting routing failures. Clients were escalating support tickets. The staging environment was locked in degraded mode. Julian tried to push a patch. It failed. He tried to bypass the auth layer. The system rejected it. He tried to spin up a parallel instance. It lacked the core neural weights. It couldn't replicate the routing logic. It was a hollow shell. Marcus called an emergency board meeting. He blamed infrastructure. He blamed legacy dependencies. He blamed me. He didn't mention the patent. He didn't mention the license. He didn't know enough to know what he was missing. I watched the stock ticker. It dipped 3% by noon. Analyst notes started circulating. Unexplained latency in core logistics platform. Enterprise client satisfaction metrics declining. Leadership transition raising operational concerns. Julian went on a podcast. He called it a scaling challenge. He called it industry-wide infrastructure friction. He smiled. He lied. He believed his own narrative. That's what arrogance does. It convinces you that reality bends to your voice. It doesn't. Reality bends to architecture. By day 2, 3 enterprise clients had triggered penalty clauses in their contracts. Routing delays exceeded acceptable thresholds. Supply chain managers were rerouting shipments manually. Costs were climbing. Marcus tried to negotiate extensions. Clients refused. They wanted reliability. They didn't want apologies, Sarah called me. Her voice was exhausted but clear. They're trying to rebuild the routing engine from scratch. They're using open source models. They're missing the weight matrices. They're guessing. Let them guess, I said. Math doesn't forgive approximation. They're panicking, she said. The board is talking about emergency consulting. They want to bring you back. Too late, I said. I don't work there anymore. She was quiet. Then she said something that surprised me. We're with you, the engineers. We know what they're doing. We know what you built. We won't touch Julian's architecture. We'll maintain stability where we can. But we won't validate their lies, thank you, I said. Keep the logs. Keep the backups. Don't let them overwrite the core. We won't, she said. Good luck, Elias. The line went dead. I didn't need luck. I needed patience. Revenge doesn't require rage. It requires precision. And precision is just time applied correctly. Day 3 began with a boardroom crisis. The general counsel had reviewed the patent documents. She had verified the filing date. She had confirmed the LLC structure. She had read the licensing agreement. She sent a formal report to the board. It was brutal. It was unambiguous. It stated that the company was operating without authorized intellectual property rights. It stated that continued deployment constituted infringement. It stated that client contracts were at risk of nullification if the system failed compliance audits. Marcus read it in a closed session. Julian wasn't invited. Marcus realized finally what he had done. He had traded architecture for optics. He had traded competence for bloodline. He had fired the only person who understood the system, and now the system was protecting itself from his nephew's incompetence. They called me. This time I answered. It was Marcus. His voice was stripped of its earlier polish. It was raw. It was desperate. Elias, he said. We need to talk. The patent situation is more complicated than we anticipated. I want to resolve this. I want to reinstate you. Full title, full compensation, equity adjustment. Name on the next press release, whatever you want. I let him finish. I listened to the desperation. I listened to the collapse. Then I spoke. You don't want to reinstate me, Marcus. You want to silence me. You want a signature on a document that says I forgive the termination. You want a press release that makes Julian look like a leader who corrected a temporary oversight. You want the stock to recover. You don't want justice. You want optics. We're talking about $12 billion in enterprise contracts, he said. We're talking about 300,000 employees across client networks relying on the routing platform. We're talking about a system you built. You're letting it fail. I didn't build it for you, I said. I built it for the network, for the engineers who maintain it, for the clients who depend on it, for the math that doesn't lie. You terminated my role. You violated the licensing terms. You're operating illegally. That's not my failure. That's your decision. What do you want? He asked. The question was stripped of pride. It was just survival. I want the license restored under new terms, I said. Independent oversight. Engineering control returned to technical leadership. Julian removed from architectural decision-making, a transparent compliance audit, a public statement acknowledging the patent ownership, and a restructuring of the board's technology committee. I don't want your job. I want the system protected. He was silent. I heard him breathing. I heard the quiet collapse of a man who had built his identity on control, only to realize he had never held it. I'll present it to the board, he said. But Julian won't step down quietly. He doesn't have to step down quietly, I said. He just has to stop touching the code. The line went dead. I closed my laptop. I stood up. I walked to the window. The city was moving. Cars. Pedestrians. Life. Unaware of the quiet war being fought in server rooms and boardrooms. Unaware of how easily empires fracture when they confuse arrogance with competence. That night, the board voted. Marcus presented the terms. The legal counsel confirmed the infringement risk. The financial advisors modeled the client loss projections. The independent directors weighed the options. They voted unanimously. Julian was removed from technology oversight. He was reassigned to brand strategy, a polite exile, a corporate burial. Marcus retained his title. But his authority was hollow. The board installed an interim technology committee, independent engineers, external auditors, real oversight. The system began to stabilize. The license was restored. The cryptographic handshake reinitialized. The routing engine returned to full throughput. Clients stopped filing penalty claims. The stock recovered. It was over quietly, without spectacle, without public apologies. Just architecture restored. Just math respected. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. I had never wanted the spotlight. I had wanted the system to work, and now it did. Julian didn't speak to me again. He posted a vague LinkedIn message about transitioning to new challenges in brand innovation. He smiled in photos. He wore tailored suits. He attended conferences. He never mentioned Aegis. He never mentioned the patent. He learned the hardest lesson of corporate America. You can inherit a title. You can't inherit competence. Marcus tried to rebuild his narrative. He gave an interview about leadership resilience. He talked about learning from operational friction. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention the patent. He didn't have to. The market doesn't reward revisionism. It rewards results, and the results spoke in routing metrics, client retention, and system uptime. I kept working. Not for them. For the architecture. I consulted through my LLC. I licensed the next generation framework to a consortium of mid-tier logistics firms. I mentored junior engineers. I published open source documentation on distributed routing validation. I stayed out of the spotlight. I stayed in the code. 6 months later, Sarah sent me a terminal log. It was a screenshot from the Aegis core. It showed a routing efficiency metric I had never seen before. 98.7%. The system was learning, adapting, evolving. It didn't need me to hold its hand. It just needed me to respect it. I typed back, "Good. Keep it running," she replied. "We will. Thank you, Elias." I closed the terminal. I sat in the quiet of my office. The city lights blurred through the glass. The hum of the cooling fans was a distant memory, but the architecture remained, and so did the truth. They thought they could replace me. They thought competence was interchangeable. They thought a patent was just paperwork. They thought a system was just a product. They were wrong on every count. You don't fire the architect. You don't ignore the foundation. You don't confuse bloodline with capability. You don't mistake silence for weakness. And you never, ever touch a system you don't understand, because the math always remembers, and the math always wins. The contract on that boardroom table was never the real agreement. The real agreement was written in code, in patents, in sleepless nights, in quiet loyalty to the truth, and I never broke it. I just waited for them to realize it existed. When the elevator doors closed that day, they thought they had won. They thought the story was over. They didn't know it was just beginning. They didn't know that revenge isn't a scream, it's a signature. It's a timestamp. It's a cryptographic hash that proves who built what, when, and why. And I signed mine in silence. The industry shifted after that. Boards stopped hiring executives for optics. They started hiring for architecture. They started reading patent filings. They started respecting the engineers who kept the lights on. It wasn't a revolution. It was a correction. And corrections don't require violence. They require clarity. I still get calls from founders, from engineers, from investors who finally understand that competence isn't a marketing asset. It's the only asset. I tell them the same thing every time. Build the foundation first. Document everything. Protect your work. Don't confuse visibility with value. And never, ever let someone who doesn't understand the math hold the keys. They usually listen. The ones who don't learn quickly. The market doesn't forgive arrogance. It prices it out. I don't watch the news anymore. I don't read the press releases. I don't care about the narratives. I care about the logs, the metrics, the routing efficiency, the system health. That's the only story that matters. The rest is noise. Julian still works in brand strategy. He attends galas. He gives speeches about corporate innovation. He smiles. He believes his own words. That's fine. Belief doesn't move data. Architecture does. Marcus still sits in his office. He still signs contracts. He still manages quarterly reports. He still looks out at the Chicago skyline. But the glass is thinner now. The air is colder. He knows what he almost lost. He knows what he almost destroyed. And he knows that competence doesn't ask for permission. It just exists. Until you try to replace it. I don't hate him. I don't hate Julian. Hate is inefficient. It clouds judgment. It distracts from architecture. I respect the math. I respect the system. I respect the engineers who keep it running. That's enough. That's always been enough. The patent sits in a secure registry. The license is active. The architecture is stable. The routing engine is learning. The network is expanding. The future is being coded in quiet rooms by people who understand that legacy isn't built on speeches. It's built on precision. And I'm still here. Not in the boardroom, not in the press, in the terminal, in the logs. In the quiet hum of a system that refuses to fail because someone finally built it right. They replaced me with the CEO's nephew. He didn't know I owned the patent on their core algorithm. He learned quickly. The market always does. The only question is how much it costs to learn the lesson. For them, it costs billions. For me, it costs patience. And patience applied correctly always returns a profit. The rain stopped. The city lights sharpened. I closed my laptop. I stood up. I walked out into the night. The air was cold. The streets were quiet. The architecture was intact, and that was enough. It always is.